I have long been a proponent of comprehensive immigration reform. In fact, in the book I talk about the bill that President Bush, John Kyle, John McCain, in fact Ted Kennedy wanted it, and we couldn't get it through in 2007. And so I think what's happened is, in the absence of federal reform, you're starting to get a patchwork of state laws. And since I believe that immigration policies need to be uniform across the country, this is not a good trend. I certainly understand the frustration of the states, but we have to be very careful, because we are a country of immigrants. We have to protect our laws and our borders, but we also have to encourage people who want to enrich us and be a part of this great American experiment to continue to come here, because without immigration we have the same sclerotic demographics of Europe and of Japan. And so the specifics of the law obviously I don't follow, but I think the patchwork of state law is a very bad idea. I think that we need to do this at the federal level.
You grew up in the Birmingham area during the civil rights movement, then to come back here now as a leader, an African-American leader, an author, and a representative of our nation. What's that like for you emotionally?
Well, it's emotionally really quite, it's wonderful. You know, I think about my parents, I think about my grandparents growing up here in Alabama. I used to even visit Lower Alabama once in a while. We love to come to Mobile. And the state has changed so much, obviously, from those rather dark days of the civil rights movement. But as I went around the world, I could say to people that what has happened in the United States, what has happened in Alabama, is evidence that, in fact, change can come. And it can come in remarkable ways. To think that just a couple decades ago, several decades ago, I couldn't go into a movie theater with my family, and I've been the Secretary of State, says something about America's ability to change. And so I think it's a heartening story, but it's also just wonderful to come and visit in what I still consider to be home.
It was interesting to read your book and your memoir, and you talking about the lessons learned following Katrina. Ironically, you did come to Mobile.
I did.
At that time. What is it that you learned just in being in one of the positions that was one of the highest in terms of government in the U.S.? You talked candidly about not only being the Secretary of State, but at that time the highest African American in office. What did you learn personally, and what did you take from it?
Yes. Well, first of all, I recognized, belatedly I would say, that my responsibilities were broader than just that of Secretary of State. When Katrina was hitting, I had done everything that the Secretary of State would be expected to do. I'd set up a way for the United States to accept foreign donations, because I wanted us to be seen as welcoming of those donations. Afghanistan, for instance, at $100,000. Now, we could have said we don't need $100,000 from Afghanistan, but it was important for the U.S. to look gracious. I'd also worked to make sure that our passport offices could continue to function, and we could get people out of New Orleans. But what I hadn't recognized, of course, was the country was going through a great national emergency. I was one of the president's closest advisors, and I was also the highest-ranking African-American in the administration. And so I had broader responsibilities and had no business going off to New York at the time of that great national tragedy. And so I guess I learned to understand how very broad my responsibilities were, and to accept that. And it was a time that I deeply regret not having seen that earlier. I also, nonetheless, when I came to Mobile, in some ways the saddest cases were of the Southeast Asian shrimpers who had come here basically with nothing after the wars in Southeast Asia, had rebuilt their lives, and then to have it essentially wiped out by Katrina. It was just very, very sad to watch that. The federal government had not responded quickly enough. But I continue to find it appalling that I ever had to say that it was not because of race that the federal government had not responded. It was because the federal government had simply been slow to respond.
I know you're on the book tour, but when you brought up the word race, I'm sorry, I have to ask.
Sure.
Hurricane, I don't know how much you've been following that. The race card has been played this week. Have you been monitoring this? What are your thoughts in terms of the way that you handled it?
Yeah. Well, I watch politics like everybody else. I love watching politics. And this is a kind of, you know, primaries are crazy seasons. All kinds of things happen in them. And I'm not much for playing the race card on either side. I think it's a dangerous tactic to immediately rush to race as an explanation. I didn't like it when people said that the criticism of President Obama was because he was black. And I don't like it when people say that the criticism of Herman Cain is because he's black. Let's take the arguments on their merits and answer them in that way.
Do you think you'll be able to survive those for 21
the thing is that the voters will decide his fate, and that's the system.
Last question.
What grade would you give Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama?
Well, I certainly think that Secretary Clinton has done a very good job. Now, she's a friend of mine. I've known her since she brought her freshman daughter to Stanford when I was provost of Stanford, and I think she's done a really fine job in what I know to be a difficult job because, you know, if you're Secretary of State, you're always hopping off the plane and hoping you don't say that you're in a country that you're not in because you're just traveling so much that it's hard to keep your bearings. So I think she's done a fine job. Look, I'm not in the business of grading my successors or the president. That's what elections are about. We had our 8 years and did what we could do. I don't agree with everything that the administration has done. I do think in the war on terror, they've done a very good job based on the infrastructure that President Bush left in place for them, and which initially they said they didn't agree with, whether it's Guantanamo or the drone strikes in the northwest frontier between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
I've got to ask you quickly, who gets the credit for getting Osama bin Laden?
The credit for getting Osama bin Laden goes to the persistence of the United States of America across 2 administrations, intelligence officers, military people, and 2 presidents who made difficult decisions. We actually learned about the courier who ultimately led us to Osama bin Laden in 2007 as a result of the intelligence work that was done under our administration. The kind of coordination that you saw between the SEALs and the intelligence officers began in Afghanistan, where we learned to merge those assets. But I absolutely am gratified that President Obama took what was a very difficult decision to go after Osama bin Laden, when I'm sure he was getting, people were saying, well, maybe it's 50-50. He took the tough decision. But I think that when one talks about credit, maybe it's not the word I would use. I would say that the result is because over 2 administrations we sustained the effort, and that's a really, really good message to American foes. Yeah.
The Iron Bowl is coming up. Alabama versus Auburn. Grew up here in Alabama.
Yes.
Very important. Very
Yes.
important. What are your thoughts?
Well, now I'm an Alabama fan. All right.
Okay.
So roll Tide. But I've got other work to do in between. The Stanford Cardinals are going to be taking on the Oregon Ducks on Saturday, so I got to keep my concentration on that one for now. All right. Thank you. Hope they get it settled. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure. Ready?
Yeah, we've got 30 seconds. Okay, that's cool. Thank you. Can I get a picture in the front?